Invite you guys to introduce yourselves, and sorry to put you on your spot. Your timing was impeccable.
Good morning. My name is Roxanne Ward. I'm a project manager.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alexander Sorokin. I just came here from Europe. Before I worked for BP and Rosneft and John Deere in the various positions. Last position was program manager. I have been working for Rosneft Lubricant Division.
So there isn't a chapter meeting for PMI Mass Bay this month, in August. We still have a few more days of July. But Professional Development Day is a month and a half away. I think that's the website read 51 days. So it's getting close, and that'll be exciting for those who can make the time. It's a Friday, Saturday. So you can do one day, either work or weekend or both days, and they have some really wonderful speakers lined up. We haven't lined up next month's speaker.
Volunteers.
So if you have a topic you've been looking for, let me know. Otherwise, I guess that's my afternoon's business, is to finally remind myself that we will want a speaker next month. Otherwise, John or I will have to speak, and that may not be as well. John will probably do well, but if you're subject to me, it won't be as much fun as getting somebody else in. Today's talk was supposed to be an introduction to emotional intelligence for project managers. We haven't seen, that may be Gina walking in from the parking lot. And if so, that would be perfect time. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's perfect timing?
Perfect timing.
I've gotten to know the hospital quite well.
Oh, gee.
Sure.
Well, because even though you said 67 South, you did say 67 South Bedford, but you also said Leahy Hospital Medical Center.
No.
There's a Leahy
Well, I
office.
know, but there was no sign for that here. It had no labels on it at all, and I never saw six, so I figured it's got to be up that way. Yeah. I feel your pain. So, bottom line, my apologies, I'm late.
We're glad you made it, and you came just as we were about to
Just introducing you.
All right. Now, you
So-
have it here, I know you said, right?
Yes.
So, okay.
Anyway, we'll do the opening remarks, which we're doing now. And we mentioned upcoming events. Gina will then present. At 8:20, I'll do the little, or John, maybe you should do it inside, to let you know that we're coming to the end, and then we'll have closing comments, and we'll be out of here at 8:30, so we can all rush to
Sit in traffic?
just to sit in traffic, yes. I should mention that we are one of many roundtables in the area. Metro West is just down the road in Waltham. South Shore, North Shore, Cambridge, two Bostons, and then we have a PMO group that meets in Woburn, that's really nice, and a healthcare group that meets in Boston. That's also well worth attending for those interested in those fields. You can find us on the MassBase site. When you get there, you no longer have to log in. You can just go straight to professional development, and no longer your third choice, but your first choice is roundtables, and there we are as MetroNorth Burlington. Today's topic, as I said, is an introduction to emotional intelligence for project managers, and Gina Aboudi has 20 years, more than 20 years of consulting experience helping global organizations develop and implement strategy around projects, processes, and people. Gina works closely with a variety of clients to develop and deliver customized workshops, seminars, training programs to meet long-term strategic needs. She's president of Aboudi Consulting Group and an adjunct faculty member at Granite State, along with John, I guess.
Yes.
Teaching in both the Master of Project Management and Master of Leadership graduate degree programs. Without further ado, it's yours.
Okay, are you gonna drive?
I can drive or you can drive.
Okay, there we go, perfect.
Right.
Okay,
We're big on empowering our speakers.
there you go. All right, I have you all have a handout with the slides. And I think I sent it to you electronically also, so you can provide it to people who might be remote. So I'm going to really do a very brief intro of emotional intelligence. This is a very brief section of part of a one-day workshop on emotional intelligence. And we're really going to focus on 4 key skills of emotional intelligence. And I'll talk about how it relates to project management as we go through. There are 2 models for emotional intelligence, and one is what's called the ability model by Solovny and Maya, which really talks about, it focuses on an individual and the individual's ability to process emotional information and to use emotional information to control how they react, how they solve problems, how they interact with others, but also to manage interactions based on that. The other model is Daniel Goleman, and Daniel Goleman is probably more commonly known to people. So emotional intelligence itself, that whole term, and Solovy and Maya have been around forever and a day. We hear much more about emotional intelligence these days because of Daniel Goleman, who links emotional intelligence as specific skills and characteristics that drive leadership performance. So what he says is people perform better and do better in the workplace when they're increasingly aware of their own emotions. So that's what Goleman says. What you find based on Goleman's work around emotional intelligence is, as an example, when I work with organizations in hiring project managers, right? When I help them do that process through HR, what we look for is not so much the project management skills they have, because our belief is, many of my clients believe we can train them in those skills. What we look for is their emotional intelligence level, right? And what you're seeing now at a leadership level in an organization is when organizations hire people into leadership roles, they're more concerned about EQ or EI, which is emotional intelligence, rather than IQ, right? So that's much more, because it's our ability to interact with others, right? And our ability to understand how to make our way around any kind of situation. So we're going to talk about 4 key areas: personal competence, which is self-awareness and self-management; social competence, which is social awareness and relationship management. On the left is what I see. On the right is what I do. So let me tell you a little bit about all of them. These are 4 distinct areas. When you look at Goleman, and in a little bit I'll show you some characteristics and leadership skills that Goleman identified and how they map back to this. So sometimes when you read some of the information around emotional intelligence, you'll see labels a little bit differently, names a little bit differently. They all go back to these 4 keys, so they fit into a frame. Self-awareness is the ability to accurately observe, evaluate, and exhibit the appropriate emotions, right? So before you can be good at building relationships, before you can be good at managing your emotions, before you can be good at social awareness, which is understanding the emotions of others, you have to understand your own emotions and acknowledge them. There is a tendency, although you see that sort of going away a little bit, but research says, and it's a tendency that women do a better job with emotional intelligence, and specifically the self-awareness part and the social awareness part than men, because women tend to be more emotional creatures overall, right? However, because of the necessity and the push for really looking at emotional intelligence, you're starting to see that changing, right? So I'm not sure that holds true as much as it did. What part of self-awareness is understanding your emotions affect not just yourself, but the decisions you make on your projects, right? How you interact with others on the project, how you engage team members on the project. Those are all impacted by your self-awareness of your emotions, right? How you manage conflict, right? your ability to move ahead and take on increasingly more complex projects within an organization is very much based on self-awareness. So you have to sort of get a grip on self-awareness before you can move on and really improve emotional intelligence in any other area. And later on, I'll give you some ideas on how to do that effectively, right? But it's a matter of recognizing emotions, and it's not a matter of saying, well, that's a good emotion and that's a bad emotion, right? Good and bad is irrelevant. Emotions are emotions. We can't suppress them. We can't hide them. There's a human beings react to everything in seconds. So it's understanding what's making me react, what's triggering the emotion, and looking at it from a general perspective of emotions, and not, that's not a good emotion to have, or that's a good emotion to have. Self-management is when we recognize those emotions, and now we can guide them in a positive way, right? So we choose how we respond. We don't lose our cool. We don't shout out at people. We don't berate a team member for something that went wrong or a task that's not completed. We choose how we respond. We see the emotion we're having, we recognize it, and we say, this is how we're going to respond in that situation, right? It's effectively also called self-regulation, regulating our emotions and how we interact with others. Self-management enables us to keep negative reactions under control. So when you hear people say, boy, he remains or she remains calm in every situation, nothing seems to derail him or her, that's self-management of emotions, right? It doesn't mean the person's not derailed, you just don't see it, right? Because they manage those emotions. One of the things we tend to do is when we're faced with a difficult situation, we react. I have a tendency to react to things, and I've been studying and looking at emotional intelligence for over 20 years, right? It's just who we are as human beings. We're emotional creatures. But if we take the time to stop and say, I'm not going to react, I'm going to think about it and see what it's triggering in me and why, and then I can respond better. There is maybe a handful of situations where you need to respond right at that second. Majority of the time, you don't. We're rarely in life and death situations. If we do, that's a different story, but rarely are. Rarely do we need a decision in 2 seconds flat. We have time to think about it. And that's what we want to get to when we're thinking about our emotions, right? And by the way, if any has questions at some point, you just interrupt me, please. Social awareness. Now, to get to social awareness, we have to be really good at self-awareness. We have to have learned self-management, and then we can work on social awareness. And social awareness is where we understand how others feel. So I don't understand just how I react or how I feel, but I understand how others are going to feel. People who are good at social awareness can walk into a room and take the temperature of the room. They can tell you how people are feeling in that room by generally just taking a glance around the room and understand how they're going to communicate, right, in that situation. So people who are good at social awareness have learned how to read others, and that includes the body language, the facial expressions, the tone of voice. Right? When I work on a lot of virtual projects. So when I work on virtual projects, in some cases I get the luxury of meeting people for the first time during a kickoff meeting. Majority of the time I don't, not in today's world with budget cuts. So I take the time for every initiative I work on to talk to people prior to getting into that first team meeting over the phone, usually using some kind of virtual platform or Skype, where we can actually see each other and communicate, and I get to know them and have a conversation with them. It enables me to better do that social awareness part, right? Because when I'm on a phone call, unless we're using some virtual thing, I can't see your face. I can't see your facial expression. I can understand your tone of voice. I can hear that. Relationship manage occurs when we're able to build strong relationships with others, right, that are supportive and mutually beneficial. So just because we're self-aware and we learn how to manage our emotions doesn't mean we get involved with people who are bad seeds, right, who just drain our energy. But when we're really good at understanding all that about emotional intelligence, we learn what relationships are good and what are not. We learn how to manage the relationships that are not good. But we understand how to get the most out of relationships by using our knowledge of ourselves and our social awareness, our knowledge of others, to really learn how to communicate and build an effective relationship with them. core areas, right, enable us to manage our emotions in positive ways. One thing to keep in mind with emotional intelligence is some people think about emotional intelligence, they think about emotional intelligence meaning that if I have emotional intelligence and I learn how to manage my emotions, I control my emotions. You can't control your emotions. Emotional intelligence is not a matter of control. We can't control. We're not robots, right? It's impossible to control them. But we can manage them for both professional and personal success. And that's by recognizing them, by understanding them. Questions? Yes. Okay. So here's a mini case study. Let's talk about this a minute, right? So Jeremy is a new project manager who just recently achieved his PMP certification. He's intelligent, ambitious, and a great communicator with senior leadership. It's obvious he would advance in the organization. However, he has a problem. He frequently loses his temper with his peers in the organization. He hates it when they don't do what he recommends they do, or actually thought they had a better idea to resolve a problem. He felt many of the team members didn't work as hard as he did, and they weren't as smart as him, in his opinion. He reacted to everything without hesitation. He knew this was a problem, but just couldn't seem to get it under control. And it didn't seem to matter to senior leadership. So really, is it a problem, he wondered? Is this a problem? Why?
Well, it's demoralizing for his teammates.
Demoralizing for his teammates, right? So we get disengaged. Over time, we can't accomplish, or we quit, or we make sure we never work with that project manager again, right? So when we have someone like this, and this is based on a client that I'm coaching, right? So when, and it's not a he, it's a she, right? And the name's not even close to Jeremy. But the rest of the situation is the same. So this individual had progressed pretty far in the organization into a international program manager role. And now he's looking to head up, he was about to be promoted to head up the PMO in the organization, except a new CEO came in who understands emotional intelligence and believes that's what you need. And the way the CEO found out there was no emotional intelligence here is by taking time to go around within the organization and not asking other senior leadership team members about Jeremy, but rather asking people who worked with Jeremy to tell their side of the story, right? So Jeremy now has to improve his emotional intelligence. One of the first things that has to be done is self-awareness. Remember, that's the first one of the 4 keys. So Jeremy now has to understand how and why he reacts in certain situations and what triggers those reactions. In order to do this effectively, Jeremy is not leading any projects right now, right? So they can keep moving forward and he can work on certain situations. And some of the ways, as project managers, if you're coaching team members who are not very emotionally intelligent, right? First of all, it's helping them understand what that means. I've had people who said to others, well, you're not very emotionally intelligent. But I don't even know what to do with that. People don't know what to do with that. So you really have to help them understand what that means and give them situations. So we're going back and replaying situations for Jeremy so he can understand. Once he understands and can and understands how to react better in that situation, then we try him in some small scenarios. And then we help him figure out, now that you've got that, now we manage those emotions. Now how do we build relationships? What do you think, even when we get Jeremy to the point where his emotional intelligence is a little bit better, and by the way, your emotional intelligence is never 100%. It's something you constantly work on. You can't say, oh, I'm good, I'm done, I'm moving on. It's never the case. It's a constant work in progress. Once we get him there, where do you think he's going to have problems now? Where are his challenges going to be?
People who've worked for him are probably have that history there that it's going to take a while to build up trust and get over it, but Jeremy.
So there's no trust. He's got to build up relationships now with people, right?
Repair some.
Yep, a lot of repairing that has to go on before he can move on. So one of the things the organization will do is if he can show that, and some people, by the way, never really get emotional, and you probably, if you think about what we're talking about today, you could probably tick off, oh, I know one of them. Oh, I know one of those. Some people are never emotionally intelligent, right? I've I've worked with CEOs who have very limited emotional intelligence. So if we can even get Jeremy there, if we can get him there, Jeremy will recognize he's got a problem, and that social awareness and relationship management is much more work for him now to get to where he needs to get, right? Yes. They might if we can get them to accept it.
Let me take a note on that one.
Yes, true. There are actually a couple people who have been some of the people Jeremy's worked with on teams have actually been in his position in other organizations where somebody kind of took them and said, we need to work with you or you're never going to get anywhere professionally. They're actually what we're going to call our guinea pigs. So they're the ones we put into situations with Jeremy to see how he reacts. Yeah. But I also bring in people from the outside to do that so we don't, damage any more. So Goldman talks about 18 specific leadership competencies, and these are them on the right. And I map them to these key competencies we talked about. Because Goldman doesn't really talk about these key competencies, which are Salovey and Myers, although sometimes you see them in different wording. Goldman talks about the leadership competencies, so he focused on leadership, but they map right in, right? Accurate self-assessment is exceptionally important, and one of the things I've done when I've been within organizations, working within organizations, and these are areas I was focusing on, I would say to people, when you need people who I'm going to say are sort of your buddies, sort of confidants, where you can say to people, when I don't react well in a situation, stop me. Stop me. A slap up the back of that, whatever it takes, just stop me from what I'm doing so I can recognize it, right? I have a tendency to react to things, so I tend to be a reactor, right? And because I react, I understand that I have to not react, which means I have to take time, which means I don't have to solve anything right that minute or even in 5 minutes. I can walk away, get my head around it, and then regroup, right? And that enables me time to effectively say, I'm not really feeling good about this. I'm not going to make a good decision because of that. Emotional intelligence is very, very linked to decisions we make. If you think back about some of the projects you've worked on, and you think about, I've had a couple of projects that I didn't make some of the best decisions, you can link them back to probably what your emotions were. So one of the things you should think about doing is thinking back to decisions you made that weren't so great and say, what was I feeling at the time when I made that decision? And you'll see that the link is in there. Leaders who tend to be emotionally intelligent create much more positive work environments, right? Because they tend to be much more collaborative, they create more collaborative situations, and they build trust among employees and leadership. So you'll often see leaders who are much more emotionally intelligent in less hierarchical organizations that are a little bit flatter. When we have less emotional intelligence, we tend to be what I like to call control freaks, right? We have to have all the power we have to control. We don't want to share with anyone. We think we have all the right answers. So when you see someone who's like that, that tends to be someone who tends to be less emotionally intelligent. Less emotional intelligent people throw things over the fence to others, right? They blame others for their situations, right? It's everyone else's fault and not their own. People who are more emotionally intelligent understand, that happened because of how I reacted or a decision I made, right? Or when you're not in a leadership role, right, someone who is less emotionally intelligent, it's the boss's fault all the time. Now, I'm not saying there aren't cases where it's not the boss's fault. Sometimes there are. But if you're more emotionally intelligent, you handle it better. And what you say is, boy, the boss is a real you-know-what to work with, so how do I use my emotional intelligence to have a better relationship for the time I have to have a relationship with this boss, right? So that's how I use my emotional intelligence more in that way. Transformational leadership, right? When people are much more emotional intelligent, those are organizations where you see leadership that's called transformational. So those are leadership where there is continuous change within the organization, continuous process improvement, right? Not chaotic, managed. So that's constant growth. When an organization has continuous change, right? Continuous improvement, that is regular growth for them. And they adapt to meet industry, market, and customer needs. So organizations that you see doing that tend to be organizations where leadership is much more emotionally intelligent. You also see a stronger customer impact because there's much more passion and commitment to customers. So one of the things you look at to really get an idea of where are people who, there's a lot of Harvard Business Review, HBR.org, and you can sign up for like free access to the site, and you can read, I don't know, I think it's like 4, 5, 6 articles for free a month. It might be up to 8, and just search emotional intelligence, and you'll see a lot of case studies around it. Also, you know how Boston every year comes out with the 100 best companies to work for, right? If you look at those best companies, look at who leads those companies, and look up a little information about them, and you'll see that there's a high emotional intelligence level with those organizations, right? And that's what's in leadership. Some of the ways to improve your emotional intelligence, right, is to look at how others are, right? So people with strong emotional intelligence, when you hear about people, boy, they really listen to others well. Boy, they're really good at negotiating. They never seem to be in conflict, and when there is conflict, they manage it well. Those are people with strong emotional intelligence. So people with strong emotional intelligence listen to others, and I'm talking about active listening, right? We all listen, but we don't frequently actively listen. So I'm sure you all know, but I'll summarize it for you briefly. Active listening is when I'll sit there and you're talking to me and I'm listening and I'm focused on you. And when you're done talking, I'm not with a response. When I'm like that with a response, I wasn't active listening. What was I doing? Processing my rebuttal. Exactly. Right? When I take a moment and I pause and I think about it and then I respond, those are active listeners, right? So you can recognize active listening. They understand, and by active listening, we understand others' wants and needs, and we use that not just to meet our own needs, but to meet theirs too. So effective negotiators have very strong emotional intelligence. So they figure out, what do I need and want in this negotiation, and what do you need and want? And through conversations with you, I can figure out what you need and want. And then I find a way to give us a win-win negotiation by using my emotional intelligence, right? Some of the ways to do it is observe people. One of the ways I used to practice thinking about emotional intelligence, specifically around social awareness and recognize it in others, is I used to work a lot in New York City, and I would go to Central Park and sit down and have lunch, and I would just watch people. I would watch people's interactions. I would watch them when they're walking and talking to others. You can figure out who was angry, who was upset, who was in a good mood. Just watch people, right? And that's a perfect way. When I'm in the airport waiting for flights, I watch people all the time, right? It's a great way to really understand the emotional intelligence of others. I also will do it by, if I'm in a meeting and I see somebody who doesn't react well, I try to figure out what are they reacting to? Why did they have the reaction that they had, right? So that's part of social awareness, it's part of understanding, why did someone just react the way they did? Because I want to be able to manage those reactions with others, right? It's also observing how you react in stressful situations. When I'm working with people during a workshop on emotional intelligence, I say to them, I want you to think about the most stressful situation you were just in that you didn't react well to. Write it down. What happened that you didn't react well to? Tell me about the day before, the evening before, that morning of. So really think through a stressful situation where you didn't react well and say, why didn't I react well? And really be honest with yourself about why you didn't react well to it. The other thing I like to do is keep a journal. So I don't do this anymore, but I would say for about 2 years daily, and then for another 2 years, maybe once or twice a week, I kept a journal about situations that happened during the day and how I reacted to them. And if I look back at my journal, what I see initially is I didn't react well, but that was a really bad reaction, or that was a good reaction. And then as I got more mature about emotional intelligence, I said, it doesn't matter if it's bad or good, it's a reaction. So So then my journal now reflects much more general reactions and started reflecting. And then I would say, why did I react that way? Well, I reacted that way in one situation. I reacted in a way I did because the person I've dealt with before has never dealt with me honestly in the past. So I immediately assumed he was lying, because that's what he's always done, right? But I need to be able to manage that, right? So there are ways to manage that. So you can keeping a journal is some of the best ways, I think, to do it. Again, slowing down and thinking. Do not overreact, and do not react right away. Just stop and think. I have been in meetings with people where they made points, and I said, those are excellent points, but I don't think I'm in a position yet to really think about a decision. However, let me think about it, and can we regroup either tomorrow morning or even later this afternoon? That gives me time to process and react, right? And think about how I'm going to act in it without losing my cool over. It's also a lot in putting yourself in another person's position. So understanding, what I'm trying to do is get to the point, and I will tell you again, it's a constant work, where I assume people are not malicious to start out with. Of course, there are always some. I could probably name a couple, we all can, but most people start out with good intentions, so I want to understand. And I've had cases with people where I've said, look, I've been in sessions where, my couple first sessions coaching with Jeremy, where I said, look, maybe now's not a good time for us to talk. I can tell that you're upset. Why don't we give it a couple of hours? Let's get back together, or let's reschedule for tomorrow or the day after, right? So recognizing that, giving people that time to cool off a little bit, right? So all of that. And understanding our own body language and others. And body language to me is always, it's always a little difficult. People get in a body language and they assume when you're sitting like this, you're closed off and you're not interested. Don't make the assumption, right? I do this because it's comfortable. I do this because I'm cold. So body language to me is, think about the person. Are they making eye contact with you? Are they nodding at you? Are they smiling on occasion? More than thinking about the standards. I think you're starting to see, if you look a little bit more about body language, you don't see as much anymore. Don't do this, right? Or don't put your hands in your pocket. You don't really see that as much as you used to, right? Because everybody's very different. You have to look at everybody as in unique situations. So some things you can do. And by the way, if anybody, I'm going to in a minute let you ask some questions, and I'm going to give you a link, and it's also in your document, to an assessment that you're welcome to take, that I do with all of my clients, and you will get from it a report. So you're welcome to do that. And if there's anything you want more around emotional intelligence, some articles, ask, and you'll be sorry you asked. No. Ask, and I will send you a ton. There's a number I have that I think are very good, including more information around although if you Google Goldman and his 18 leadership companies, you can find information, but I'm happy to share things with you. One of the biggest things, again, is self-awareness. You have to get self-awareness. People tend to avoid thoughts and feelings, or they group them as good or bad. Don't do that, right? And don't avoid them. Acknowledge them. We all have thoughts, we all have feelings about things. Acknowledge them. Once we acknowledge them, we can manage them. If you cannot get to self-awareness, you can't get to anything else. You cannot get it. I've had people say, oh, I'm really great at relationship building, but when you talk to them and you see them in situations, they have no awareness of their own emotions. They're absolutely not good at relationship building. They're not, right? Don't buy into thoughts and feelings. Don't get wrapped up into, that's negative, that was good, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, and wallow in it. Don't get swept up in it. Just move on, take a deep breath, and say, how do I avoid that in the future? Or what triggered that in me? Because when we understand what our triggers are, we can avoid those triggers, right? So we can avoid those triggers. I have a tendency to not get angry quickly. However, when things pile up, I will snap. And it's like, where did you snap from? My husband will say, what happened? All of a sudden, but it's not all of a sudden, things have been piling up. So I've learned to recognize that in me. Instead of letting it pile up, I deal with it. I deal with little things as they come up, on and on. And we want values to drive the choices and decisions we make, not our thoughts. So when we have low emotional intelligence, or we're not managing our emotions, what drives our decisions is our emotions at the moment. And I'm sure you can all think about decisions you made that like, oh, that wasn't good. I've got a number of those myself. We all do, right? that when we go back and think about it, we said, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have been as emotional, I would have been fine. So instead, let values, and figure out what are your values, right? We are drawn to companies and roles that have our values. Our values might be being honest, being trustworthy, right? Building bridges with others. Think about what your values are. We make decisions, and there's personal as business type values, right? So think about what are your personal values, and let those drive the decisions that you make, right? Not the thoughts, not your emotions. So this is the URL, and if anyone doesn't have it, I'll give you my card, but you can just search Gina Aboudi, you can find me. The password is MetroNorth. It is in this deck also. It'll be available until just before midnight, 11:59 on August 4th, if you want to take it. If you want to take it, I will see that you took it, and I will return it to you. It doesn't get used for anything else. I don't use it for research or anything. Once I send you your report and you acknowledge you've had it, I delete the information around it. It doesn't take long. It's no more than 10 minutes to complete. I will encourage you, if you do it, to be honest. No one sees it but you. And I will give you sort of thoughts and suggestions on how you might improve in certain areas, right? Based on your emotional intelligence level in those areas. And it looks at it across those 4 key areas. So you're more than welcome to go ahead and take it if you're interested in really understanding more about your own emotional intelligence skills. There is a couple of books out there on emotional intelligence. I haven't found any that I thought have been really, really exceptionally good. Goldman has one about leadership stuff, which isn't too bad. There was one written about emotional intelligence for project managers. It isn't bad. It's interesting reading. I don't know that I've gotten much out of it. I think the best stuff I've seen around emotional intelligence, to be honest with you, has been information out on websites, and in particular from Harvard Business Review, who've done some stuff on emotional intelligence. I think I see some of the best information there. There is something that I can't think of the name of the book, but I can find it if anybody is interested. It's a very small book, and you can read it in like an hour or 2. And it's supposed to be tied to emotional intelligence, and I think it's got a couple good hints in it, but I haven't found much in the way of books that give a lot. And I think it's because emotional intelligence is it's a personal thing, and it's a constant work. It's constant work. You always meet new people, and new people trigger different emotions. So you find as you meet and interact with new people, you have to think about, what about this person is making me react the way I'm reacting, or think the thoughts I'm thinking, right? And how do I manage through it? It's sort of how you have to think about it. Right? But again, you start first with self-awareness. Once you say, yep, I understand my emotions, I recognize them, I don't push them aside, and then you can manage them, right? That's when you start managing them. Once you manage them, that's when you can start thinking about, what do I see in other people, right? What is some of the stuff I see in others? And that's when we start building stronger relationships. And I will tell you again, I am finding that there are more and more people, organizations who look for emotional intelligence, and they do that through interviews. So I've done it through interview situations where you put somebody in a stressful situation. One company, I help them with their interviews is they do group interviews. In group interviews, there are 25 people in a room with the candidate. And people play a variety of roles. So as the candidate is talking, someone will say, wait, what? What are you even talking about? Start again. And they look at how the person handles the situation, right? I'm not a big, it's not. I've gone through those kind of interviews, but I've gone through them in kind of case study situations. They also do, when they give them case study scenarios, and they don't care about what is the decision you would make? You're in a problem, right? But they care about how did you think about the problem, how did you get there? And what they're looking for is, how did you think about the characters who were there, right? And what they were bringing to the table to make your decision. Some places use assessments for them. I use this particular assessment, if you decide to go take it, I use it clients to, they take before the class. We use it to kind of focus the workshop a little bit, give them individual ideas, and then we have them take the assessment later on down the road. The problem with assessments are, if you're smart, and many of you may have done this, have you ever had somebody give you like a personality assessment? But you sort of know where they're heading when you read those questions, don't you? Right? Most people know where they're heading when they read those questions. I don't care how good the PhD is or put them together. You can read through them. So that's my problem with using those kind of assessments for that purpose. I think they're interesting information for people, but they also have to respond honestly to them, right? So if you do decide to take this, and be honest, no one else is going to see it. And I don't keep it, I don't share it with anybody, I send it to you, and then I delete it. Any questions? I know this was sort of a whirlwind tour of emotional intelligence, but any questions that I can answer? Yes?
I didn't understand all of the minus.
It probably does a little bit. I am not and I apologize for anybody who's licensed and doesn't, I'm not a big fan of DISC or Myers-Briggs. I think they're interesting. I just don't, I think they're limiting. So yeah, I think it does tie a little bit to it probably. What I find interesting about Myers-Briggs is it helps you understand sort of how people are a little bit. So I think it helps you work with them, and you could tie it into emotional intelligence. It's the same, by the way, I work with a variety of cultures, so I do a lot of background information about people and their cultural backgrounds. But just because, you know, we come from a certain area, of a certain cultural background, we're all unique. I use it as a starting point, so I would probably say use Myers-Briggs or any kind of this stuff as a starting point to sort of understand someone. Does that help? Yeah.
That was going to be my question. How do you find different cultural backgrounds or even regional backgrounds help? Like you said, you worked in New York. New York's a little different than New Hampshire. And
Yes. You know, everyone thinks, you know, United States is culture. Oh, no. United States has so many different cultures.
in other countries as well, too.
In the other countries as well, that's right. So I look a little bit about different cultures and the backgrounds on them, and there is a guy, Gert, his first name is G-E-E-R-T. Hofstede, H-O-F-S-T-E-D-E. So H-O-F-S-T-E-D-E. And first name G-E-E-R-T. And he's done a lot on cultural dimensions. So you can go out on his website, you can download information about every country and sort of how they process information, how they solve problems, how they think, right? Across a number of dimensions. And it's interesting, and I use it, but again, it's just a starting point for me, right?
I had met a couple of people in class, and they both had the same comment, that they couldn't understand why, when they came to work on Monday morning, people wanted to talk about their weekend, and they were just do what I need you to do. And I'm like, well, you're in the United States now.
Yes.
And that little social
Exactly. When I go to Germany, we don't do that. Yeah. So one of the things I do a lot of work with Germany. And Germany is just one country, right? And not everybody in Germany again. So when I do work with Germany, and I have conference calls for meetings, I usually say the conference call, I'm going to just say, starts at 1 p.m., right? However, I'm going to be on at 12:30, and I saw this great movie over the weekend, if anyone wants to talk about what they did over the weekend. That accommodates both, right? So what that does is people who want to talk about what they did, they want to have a personal conversation, how was your weekend, blah, blah, blah. We do that at 12:30. The minute 1 o'clock starts, the people who say, I don't give a damn what you did over the weekend, and you don't need to know what I did, it's not your business, 1 o'clock, boom, we start the meeting. That's how I accommodate that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's how I accommodate. I also know in countries where I go where long before I get to talk about business, we're going to socialize, we're going to get to know each other. In other companies where they don't give a damn about who I am, we're just going to talk about business. Okay? A lot of that I've learned. I use Hofstede stuff now quite a bit, all of its research around it. You can also contact a consulate or an embassy, and they share that information with you. A lot of the ways I learned about it is I used to work for McKinsey & Company, which is a management consulting firm, and before you went anywhere, they taught you about the culture. They teach about the culture and sort of norms of that culture. So that to me is a bit of a starting point.
My son goes to a boarding school with kids from all over the world, and the kids are very interesting because they're aware of the cultural differences, and they'll talk and ask you questions, and they explain their background, and it's kind of fascinating.
Oh, yeah. That's a perfect place for him, especially in today's global world. That's perfect. A perfect opportunity. Yeah, they're all very much linked together, I think. I think emotional intelligence, cultural diversity, you know, the kind of personality is very much all linked together. It really is. And you see, it's much more important when we think about it and not diminishing the skills people have, right? Your technical skills, I'm not diminishing. We all have technical skills in certain areas. Those are easier to learn than it is to learn the emotional component. Other questions, thoughts? And anyone's free to reach out if you have any specific questions, thoughts, so you want to.
This person, Jeremy, I'm just curious, you said they took him out of these management positions while he was undergoing some, like training. So what did he do?
Oh, he's in the organization, and he's doing a little bit of administrative work right now. He's not interacting with people right now. The CEO wants to give him some time to basically fix him, in a sense. Yeah. They want to see if they can fix him. They want to give him an opportunity. And the reason why is, this CEO would never have hired him in the first place, but he figured he's been giving a bad deal, having been kept so long and thinking it was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find certain disciplines struggle with emotional intelligence, generally?
I work a lot in pharma companies. I work with doctors quite a bit. I work with scientists. I work with engineers. I work with application developers. Yes. Yeah, they do. Yep. But they can get there. Anyone can get there. You just got to say, I'm going to work on it.
Well, sometimes they don't even realize they're not there. I volunteer at a hospital.
Yeah, they've got to, that's the self-awareness. You got to be there first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I only interrupt because it's 8:26.
Yep.
So give us some time to fill out the survey. And anybody who has signed the sign-in sheet, do so. In fact, I really want to do, if you got an email with a link, make sure you registered online, because that will become, we're going to phase out the sign-in sheet, and what will become the new record of the attendance is did you sign up on my event?
So should we have done that for this meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can do it in a couple hours, so.
Oh, I see, okay.
And if you don't have that link, you didn't sign up, let John or I know. We'll immediately.
That's separate from getting the CEU. That's still on us to take care of.
Yes.
I see, okay.